Let's move forward. Let's talk about this Patrick Beverly for Talen Horton-Tucker and Stanley Johnson deal. Interesting move. It feels more than anything like it's the first domino for where the Lakers are going. And I thought you brought up an interesting point that it could be the first domino league wide with everything. So, what did you think of this move when you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Lakers were holding out hope for Kyrie Irving. That appears to be moot now with the Kevin Durant news, which we'll get to in a minute. And, I never really thought the Lakers were going to stand pat going into this year, given how much is at stake and how you heard them about Buddy Hield and in the mix for some other stuff. So I never really bought into the idea that it was Kyrie or bust for the Lakers offseason. And with the Kevin Durant dust settling now, there may be now some talks picking up on his end. What happens to Russell Westbrook? So I wasn't really surprised. I'm selfishly, as someone who has covered so much drama in the past 3 years, rooting for Russ and Pat Bev to stay on the same roster, given the history there. But I if anything, to me, like I don't think the Lakers make that deal, given all the other drama they've had on their own, without the indication that Russell Westbrook might be moved next. So I don't, as you said, I don't think this is it in terms of transactions for the Lakers and for league wide. Now that the main news is out of the way with Kevin Durant. That being said, I don't think Pat Beverly moves the needle a ton for the Lakers. He's 34, hasn't made an all-defensive team in a few years now. So he's a piece, but
so what I would say is the only reason he moves the needle for them is because their 3 through 15 rotation is what it is right now, right? Or even let's say 4 through 15 rotation, if you want to include Russ at number 3. I don't know what their front office was doing this summer, but they acquired a lot of guys that are very questionable shooters to put around LeBron. So last year they had 4 guys that made at least 36% of their 3-pointers while taking at least 200 attempts from 3. It was Malik Monk, Carmelo Anthony, Avery Bradley, and Wayne Ellington. None of those guys are on the roster right now. And really, you can say the only 2 that you really could consider wanting back are Malik Monk and Carmelo Anthony. But the rest of the roster outside of LeBron shot 32, 33% from 3 last year. And they would have been dead last in the league. So they went out and they got Lonnie Walker, who shot 30% from 3, probably a little bit better of a shooter than that, but still isn't entirely consistent from 3. Troy Brown shot 35 from 3, but another guy that is not a particularly consistent shooter or a guy that teams close out on from 3. Thomas Bryant, who over a 50-game stretch in Washington shot 40% from 3, but then last year when he returned from his ACL injury, shot 28% from 3. And then Juan Toscano Anderson, who's a 32% 3-point shooter. So I think there was a real case that, as we talked about with Jovan on the last episode, that wasn't with Spins, this was maybe the worst shooting roster in the NBA. And with Patrick Beverly, you at least get a guy who's going to make 38% of his 4 to 5 3-point attempts per game. And that's really important for them. They needed another guy that could consistently get closed out on, that will consistently space the floor. I also think Pat is kind of an underrated decision maker. He had a 3.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio playing as a secondary ball handler last year. He's gotten better at that. He is someone that is reliable if you need him to make quick read decisions on the court. And then on top of it, he obviously just gives you a real defensive intensity. That this is how the Lakers won the title in 2020. They won it on the back of defense and toughness. They didn't look, obviously they went on the back of LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but you look at everyone else on that roster, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Alex Caruso, guys like that. There's guys that were physical, guys that weren't afraid to just absolutely dole out some shit. And I think that Pat Bev helps them in that regard. Having said that, I wrote a story for the website today about the deal. I think it was something like this was necessary for the Lakers. But I also like the fit of Talen Horton-Tucker in Brooklyn. What do you think of Talen Horton-Tucker? Or I'm sorry, in Utah, not in Brooklyn. What do you think of Talen Horton-Tucker?
No, I've been a THT fan for a long time, actually. Missouri student there, and he was one of the few recruits to regularly pick up the phone for me. So that always, as you should know, that always gives you a special place in their heart. I like it in the sense of that he's, Utah's rebuilding. I like Will Hardy a lot as a coach. I know a lot of people that have worked with him and speak very highly of him. So I think that from a development standpoint and him having, less pressure and more flexibility in what he can do, I think will be good for him. Um, I'm also curious because of Donovan Mitchell still being on the roster. Are they going to play them together? Is he going to be his backup? What's that going to look like, assuming they start the season with Donovan on the roster? So I like it for a lot of reasons for him and Stanley Johnson too. He was a good little, feel good story last year. I feel like with the way I think he started on 10 days and then worked his way back into a full contract. He's another one, young guy that didn't work out from the first few years in the league. And now here he is kind of, making a second act for himself. So I think he's got a stable job in Utah, given what they're about to or appear to be going through with a rebuild. So and it doesn't cost the Lakers either their first round picks either. So that gives them some flexibility to do something else now in the coming weeks before training camp. So overall, I'm still a THT believer. I know, he has battled some injuries and some other stuff throughout the past 3 years, but I like the fit in Utah, especially given the stakes are lower.
Yeah, so the front office stuff worth noting here. Obviously, the Lakers did not give up their 2027 or 2029 first round picks. Those are the two that are available to be traded that they have access to. That gives them further flexibility down the road. On top of that, they also have now an extra roster spot because they traded 2 for 1, which could help them in a Russell Westbrook trade moving forward. For the Jazz on the cap side, Talen Horton-Tucker is on essentially like a 2-year, $20 million deal, $21 million deal, something like that, where he has an opt-out at the end of this year. So if he plays really well, this could just be a tryout for Talen Horton-Tucker elsewhere. But look, it seems like Utah, and Tony Jones reported this, that they're happy to go into the season with Donovan Mitchell on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like Donovan Mitchell at some point in the next year, let's say, will be traded because you don't want to sit in the middle in the NBA. And that's where Utah would be with this roster with Donovan Mitchell, Mike Conley, Bojan Bogdanovic, Jordan Clarkson.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they would just kind of be in the middle, and it's not where you want to be in the NBA. So I would assume at some point in the next year, they're going to move Mitchell and they're going to probably have real on ball opportunities for someone to step into. Talen Horton-Tucker is a bad off ball player right now.
Mm-hmm.
He was not an effective rotation player for the Lakers this year because he struggled to play with LeBron. Because he is not a good shooter. He shot 28% from 3 this year, I believe.
Yeah.
And he's not a good defender right now. I know that Frank Vogel talked up the idea of him being their stopper, right? Him being their energy defender. He's not that guy. He's 21 years old and he doesn't know his rotations yet. And frankly, like, I think he could probably stand to get into like a little bit better condition because his feet are not quite quick enough just to like stick in front. I know he has this very unique frame and he's 6'4" with a 7'1" wingspan and 235 pounds. And that's what like makes scouts continue to like be so enticed by him. Right. Because look, like I just wrote 2,000 words today talking about like why scouts are enticed by him. Right. And I'm still really interested. And it's because it's hard to find guys that have that size, that length, that kind of strength, that have real dexterity on the ball. Like, he's shifty. He has the ability to create plays with the ball in his hands. Like, if you get him going downhill off of a dribble handoff, he can make some shit happen, right? Like, he's a good live dribble passer. He is improving in terms of his craft as a finisher at the basket. Like, he's not a very vertical athlete, but he's figuring out his footwork to be able to finish around guys below the rim and use that length to his advantage and extend and finish, right? He's a fascinating player. And look, if he doesn't improve off the ball, like as a shooter, as a defender, and can't make an impact off the ball, like there's a very real chance that he might end up in China in 2 years. Like, let's just be real with it, right? Like he could end up being like a nothing burger for Utah.
Yeah.
But his ability on the ball is real, and that has real upside. And if you're Utah at this point, and we assume at some point in the next year, once they get what they want for Donovan Mitchell, that they're going to be rebuilding in some respect, these are the flyers that you take. I think these guys that have real on-ball skill that might be able to either be trade assets or have high upside, because I do think Horton-Tucker has high upside. It's just his floor is very low as well.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I know you talk about Utah's roster right now between Mitchell, Clarkson, Conley, as you were saying. I mean, they have a lot of ball handlers right now. I'm not trying to put the cart in front of the horse, but they're an interesting team to me in two ways. I mean, how much does their phone ring now in the next few weeks, now that we said that we should see some more transactions as a sell-off could potentially begin? And if not, and they go into the year with these guys, I think Jordan Clarkson would be very appetizing to a contender at the deadline. Same thing with Conley. You mentioned Bojan. Like, they have a lot of pieces on their roster right now that if they want to have a fire sale, like, their phone will keep ringing for a number of their guys. So hypothetically, as they get rid of some of those guys, his responsibility and ability to handle the ball, and as you said, kind of improve his own stock and increase the potential market for himself next year if he wants to opt out is there. So what Utah does from here will be interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, this might end up being nothing for Utah. Talen Horton-Tucker might not be worth anything, and they have Stanley Johnson for a year, and then, he still can't really shoot, which is a problem, which is why, while it was a nice story last year that he kind of emerged and earned minutes, he's still like not really a guy that you compare with LeBron and make it work really, because look, everyone that plays on a roster with LeBron James outside of the second superstar is a 3-and-D guy, basically. That just is what LeBron and his force of nature turns you into as a player, because you're just not going to have the ball as much. So that's why Pat Bev works a little bit better. He's just a better fit, unfortunately, for the Lakers and for Talen Horton-Tucker. But I think Talen Horton-Tucker is going to get a real opportunity here in Utah.